Seinfeld has a new home now. The beloved sitcom will be moving from Hulu to Netflix in 2021 after the streaming service acquired the worldwide streaming rights. Who's joining us now is our friend Alan Wolk, co-founder and lead analyst over at TV Rev. Alan, always a pleasure to see you.
Likewise,
the LA Times
yes.
is saying that Netflix is paying far more than the $500 million that NBCUniversal recently paid for The Office. So when Hulu acquired the rights just back in 2015, it only paid at that time $130 million, which back then was a crazy amount of money. So is this worth it for Netflix, $500 million?
You know, it's funny, I've been thinking about it, and I don't know. So here's the thing, shows like Seinfeld that were very critically acclaimed during their heyday often don't age well or do well as reruns. If you think about what shows do well as reruns, there's shows that have very basic plots that you can that are easy to follow. Friends, The Brady Bunch, Gilligan's Island, I Love Lucy. Those are shows, and I Love Lucy was a great show, but they're often stuff that just is very familiar. You don't have to pay a ton of attention to it. Things like Mary Tyler Moore Show, All in the Family, MASH, that were critically acclaimed in their day, haven't really killed it as reruns.
I think this idea of shows that you don't really have to pay attention to really hits on, I think, how millennials and Gen Z maybe consumes content. It's more ambient. You just kind of keep it on as you're doing other things. Yeah. Does that kind of indicate the types of shows that these streaming platforms maybe want is those that you don't have to pay attention to, that you can just keep on because also it's accessible at any time on these streaming platforms?
I think so, because and I know, I'm not a millennial and I watched, TV like that too when I was a kid. I used to watch, Gilligan's Island and Bewitched while I did my homework. And it was because they were easy to follow along. In other words, if you picked your head up every 5 minutes, you could figure out what went on. It was, and you knew the characters, and especially in a lot of these streaming services, it's 20 minutes because the show is 22 minutes and then you factor in the intro and the outro. And they're quick, and you know everybody who's in it, and you know what happens. You know that Ross winds up with Rachel at the end, and there's no mystery.
But then on the other hand, though, we have this original content that is very involved, like a Game of Thrones, for example, where there's lots of plot lines, so many nuances to the characters. So do you feel like it's going to be this kind of dichotomy where you have old reruns that you don't have to pay attention to, and then very serious, you have to pay attention to original content, and maybe not as much in the middle?
100%. I think there's this, there's this sense that there's certain shows that don't talk to me while I'm watching them. It's appointment TV. People like binging them or at least watching them off schedule, if they can. Like even if it's an hour later, it's like, okay, this is my time. I'm finished with everything I have to do. And then there's the ambient stuff too. You have some stuff that's in the middle, like say HGTV, which is like you sort of pay attention to it. It's live, but it's it's Property Brothers. But then, a lot of this stuff, that's why there's a bunch of companies we've been calling them the FAST, the free ad-supported streaming TV services, Pluto, Zumo, Tubi, and they've been doing really well with, with really nothing more than a bunch of reruns from, the 80s and 90s and movies like Legally Blonde and Caddyshack. They're ad-supported, but they're free, and people are like, I'll just put that on in the background.
But what's interesting in all this, Alan, is the role nostalgia is playing in all this. I mean, Comcast, when they announced Peacock, it was, look at this, we've got The Office, and we've got all these shows that you've been familiar with.
Saved by the Bell reboot.
Saved by the Bell. Even Disney Plus, when they announced all their new shows, it was a Lizzie McGuire reboot and all these Marvel shows. So what role does nostalgia really play in getting people to go to these streaming services?
I think a lot. I think with all the streaming services, what's going to happen is there's going to be a couple years where everybody's figuring out who the different services, who they are, what do they want to be when they grow up, and what do they stand for, and is this my service? There'll probably be a lot of rebundling of things too, where instead of going month to month, they'll be like, sign up for 2 years, we'll give you 20% off, or we'll give you these 4 together, and all that. But I think it's a way to get attention because people know those shows. That's Disney's big advantage, right? Is everything that's on there. So they don't have to. One of Netflix's problems is that in addition to releasing everything all at once, they have all these new shows. And they have to sort of tell you what the show is about and get you to want to watch it. Whereas a reboot of High School Musical is just like, okay, I know what that is, just tell me when it's on. And you know who's killing it with, who's going to kill it with all that stuff is Viacom. Because they have all those Nick shows from the 90s, the iCarly and SpongeBob and Rugrats, and that whole generation that's coming up now grew up on that.
So you have essentially this built-in fan base for a lot of this content, but when it comes to loyalty, do you think it will end up being on loyalty towards streaming platforms themselves or loyalty towards particular shows? How are these companies going to get consumers to actually pay attention? Is it because, you know, they'll feel a connection to the platform or to the individual shows?
I think it's going to start off with individual shows, but I think it'll be like the way it used to be with networks back in the day, where, right, you know, all of a sudden, like in the 70s, CBS had a bunch of series, you know, All in the Family and MASH and Mary Tyler Moore that's kind of made a certain type of show that became very popular and made them the thing. And then in the 90s, it was NBC, had, you know, Mad About You and Friends and Seinfeld. And there was sort of a theme through that, you know, single people or young marrieds in New York. And I think that the streaming services will hit on that. They'll find a show or two that kind of you can sort of pair together and people go, okay, that's what Peacock is about. That's what HBO Max is about. But I think it's going to start with the shows. I also think if you can do month to month, it's going to be really easy for people to flit from show to show. And we're going to see a ton of churning the first couple of years. People just going, okay, I'm going to subscribe to this and watch this show, then I'm going to get rid of that and go to the other one.
That's what I do. I mean,
yes.
I pay for Showtime only to watch one show, and then when it's over, buy Showtime.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's how everybody else is doing it.
Exactly. And it's easy now. You know, there was a period when it was, then it wasn't because they would lock you in with these bundles. Now it's month to month. So that's why we think there's going to be, we've been calling it the great rebundling, where it's going to come from three places. It's going to be the actual networks themselves, the platforms themselves will do, you know, sign up for 2 years, we'll give you a deal. Then it could be the virtual MVPDs like the Hulu Live TV and YouTube TV saying, okay, we'll give you our service plus these 4 flixes for X dollars, but, you know, 2-year deal. And then, you know, so the devices, the Roku and Amazon will also probably make put together bundles.
A great rebundling. It's only inevitable. Alan, always great to have you on. That's Alan Wolk, co-founder and lead analyst at TV Rev. Thanks again.
Great to see you.